In the next part, we'll focus on a 3D environment created by Photoshop. Now in Photoshop CS3, we can export a vanishing point file. Now if you don't have Photoshop CS3, don't worry, you can just watch. And I've already included all of the files you need once we come back to After Effects. Here in Photoshop, if we navigate to the Project Files folder, then in the Chapter 3 folder, we'll open up the Photoshop file called Guardhouse. From the Filter pull-down menu, we'll find the Vanishing Point filter. Now this filter has been around in previous versions of Photoshop, but it works a little bit differently now that it can export all of its grid data. Here, I'm simply going to change our vanishing point planes by moving these out a little bit. Then if I hold the Control key down or the Command key on Mac, I can click and drag to draw additional planes. I'll click and drag to draw additional planes up from here. Then simply use the Move tool to cover the dimensional faces of the building. When I create a new plane, Photoshop is going to change it to a right angle. In order to modify the angle, I'll hold down the Alt key or the Option key on a Mac. I'll continue to add more grids in order to cover all of the planar views of my scene. With most of the planes set up, I'll simply click and drag to modify these in order to cover the rest of the image. And add one last plane for the ground. With all of these planes set up now, I'll use the new flyout menu at the top of this window, then select Export for After Effects CS3. Photoshop is going to ask me where I want to put this and what I want to call it. I'll call this Guardhouse, then hit Save. Photoshop will create an image for each of the planes that I've set up in the Vanishing Point filter. I can now click OK and go back into After Effects. Within After Effects, I'll close the source materials, then use the File pull-down menu and go to Import. I can't import it as a file, I need to import it as vanishing point data. Once I click OK, After Effects is going to ask me where that vanishing point data is. So I'll navigate back into the Footage folder. Under Photoshop, we'll find our Guardhouse VPE data. Simply click OK. Now if you haven't set this up, not to worry, inside of our project window, if we scroll up to the top, you'll find composition number 4, Guardhouse VPE, that already has all of the data associated with the file. Here inside the source materials, we can see that there are 7 different grids, and Photoshop has created 7 different PNG files for each one of those grids and laid them out in 3D space using the VPE data. So let's go up, and rather than using this current composition, we'll use composition number 4, Guardhouse VPE. Here you can see the layout that Photoshop gives us, with all of those different layers already parented to a null object which has been named parent. Additionally, there's a camera that's been created based on the grids that we set up in the vanishing point data in Photoshop. The real beauty of this plugin is apparent when we move the parent or the camera around. For this scene, we'll simply choose the Orbit Camera tool by pressing C on the keyboard until we get our Orbit Camera tool. Now by clicking and dragging inside the comp window, we can see that there are 3D planes that have been set up by Photoshop to produce this 3D environment in After Effects. However, if we move the camera too far off axis, we can see where this 3D environment starts to break apart. Remember, we're creating all of this data from a 2D image, and obviously there are going to be parts that we can't see in our 2D image that we won't have access to in our 3D scene. But if we go back to something closer to our original position and use the C key to jump to our Z-Track tool, you can see by clicking and dragging that this produces a great 3D environment for some subtle camera moves. Let's take a look at one more vanishing point example. Back in Photoshop, we'll open up a file called Country Road. Again, we'll go up to Filter and select Vanishing Point. Here inside the Vanishing Point filter, Brian has already laid down the first grid in this scene along the path in this country road scene. All we need to do is create some new grids that define the canopy around this road. So again, I'll use the Control key or the Command key on a Mac to click and drag. Now this is going to create a perpendicular plane, and I don't want that, so I'll use the Alt key or the Option key on a Mac to change the angle of this grid. I'll continue to use the Control or Command key and the Alt or Option key to add new grids and change their angles. Last, I'll select the very first layer, then drag a grid up from that, and expand its edges so that it overlaps all of the other layers. Again, we can come up to the flyout menu at the upper left-hand corner of this window, then choose Export for After Effects CS3. We'll call this Country Road. Then use Enter to accept the save. We'll go back to After Effects, then import this the same way we did the guardhouse. Now, if you don't have Photoshop CS3, I've got a composition already set up called number 5, Country Road. So by clicking here, we can see the Country Road setup that Photoshop created for us using the Vanishing Point exporter. By clicking and dragging the value for the parent's position on the X value, we can see a nice subtle shift in the perspective of this country road. Additionally, if we use the camera, then again inside of our composition window, using the C key on the keyboard, navigating to the Z track tool, we can click and drag to zoom in and out of this 3D environment to see the way these layers have been mapped inside of our 3D environment. We'll move it far off axis by using the camera orbit tool, then using the camera move tool, move it up into view so we can see what's really going on in here. All of those different layers have been set up in 3D space, distorted from our camera, so that as we move through the barrel of those planes, we're getting the illusion of perspective. We'll undo to get back to our original camera position, and here inside of our camera position, we'll use the comma key to zoom out of our comp window, and now you should be able to see all of the different layers set up in 3D space, which give us the illusion of this country road. Now with all of the 3D parameters, cameras, lights, and the ability to create very quick 3D environments inside of After Effects, the third dimension will open up a whole new realm of possibilities for all of your other animations that you create in After Effects.